Welcome to Terran Apex Protocol, where the galaxy keeps underestimating humanity and keeps regretting it. If these stories are your kind of story, subscribe and stay with us. My name's Atlas. Today, a galaxy that retires its soldiers the day their hands begin to tremble learns what an old woman with a shaking hand can do when she stops being afraid of dying. Let's begin. The pen wouldn't hold still. Ruth Okafor was 74 years old, and the recommissioning form lay flat on the steel desk in front of her, and the line where her signature was supposed to go was a small empty country she could not quite reach. Her hand hovered over it. The tremor took the tip of the pen and drew a little tight circle in the air, the way it always did now, the way it had for 6 years. She watched it the way you watch weather. She had stopped being angry at it a long time ago. She pressed the pen down anyway. The signature came out crooked. It was legible. That was all a signature had to be. The clerk across the desk was Ophiri, young, his quills standing up stiff and bright behind his skull, and he looked at the crooked line on the form, and then looked at her hand, and then looked very carefully at the wall. He had been trained, she understood, not to stare at the shaking. Among his people, you did not stare at a dying thing. You looked away to spare it shame. "There's no shame in it," she said. "Old machinery. Still runs." The clerk's translator rendered her words a half-second late, and his quills flattened a fraction, the way they did when an elder said something that wasn't supposed to be sayable. He stamped the form. The stamp said the human carrier's CNS lodestar was active again, after 11 years cold in a parking orbit, and that one Captain Ruth Okafor, retired, medically disqualified from frontline command by Alliance Reflex Standard 417, was her commanding officer of record. Below her name there were 41 others. She had read every one of them twice. Ced Marlowe, helmsman, age 81, hands palsied so badly he ate with a weighted spoon. Lottie Vance, gunner, 68, blind in the left eye and going in the right. Dawit Beckel, Master Chief, Reactor 69, a heart that the fleet surgeons had drawn a red line through and written "Do not certify." Cooks who had cooked through 3 wars. A surgeon who had retired the year half the people on this list were still lieutenants. Every name on the manifest was a name some board of fast young officers had looked at and decided was finished. She had asked for them by hand, each one. The lodestar woke up slow. That was the first thing, and the strange thing, and the thing the watching Ophiri could not file anywhere in their heads. A modern ship woke fast. You hit the sequence and the reactor spun up, screaming, and the lights came on all at once like a slap, and the young crews loved it, the violence of a machine coming alive in under a minute. The lodestar did not do that. The old crew brought her up the way you wake someone you love who is sick. One system at a time, listening between each one. Beckel sat in the reactor gallery, with his hand flat on the housing, eyes closed, feeling the spin-up through his palm, and when the harmonic came in a little rough, he held up one finger, and they waited, all of them, an old man's finger holding back the entire start sequence until the rough note smoothed out, and he nodded, and they went on. 11 minutes to bring her hot. The drill manuals said 4. On the cutter, swift verdict, holding station 3,000 kilometers off the lodestar's flank, Sub-Marshal Neth watched the timer and let his crest go flat with contempt. 11 minutes. A youth-crewed Ophiri cutter went hot in 90 seconds and could put a round downrange before the human reactor finished clearing its throat. He had asked his fleet mother why he had drawn this assignment, escort and observation of the human geriatric ship, and she had not answered in words. She had simply let him understand that it was a punishment, and that he had earned it, and that the most useless duty in the formation was the right place for an officer who had embarrassed her. The fleet had a name for the lodestar before she ever fired a shot. They called her the retirement home with railguns. The young officers said it in the wardrooms, and the dock crews said it on the gantries, and somewhere along the line, the Lodestar's own crew heard it and decided they liked it, and they painted a quieter name on the inside of the main airlock where only they would see it. They called themselves the Grey Fleet. Said Marlowe, the helmsman, 81 years old, had done the lettering with a palsied hand, and the letters wandered, and nobody fixed them, because the wandering was the point. A steady hand had not earned the right to that word. They had. You could read the whole crew in the way they moved. Nobody hurried. There was a galley aboard the Lodestar run by a cook who had fed the fleet through 3 wars, and he served real food on real plates at fixed hours. And the young liaison officers found it baffling, because a modern warship ate from tubes on the move. The Grey Fleet sat down to eat. They had learned, every one of them, in some hard year the young had not lived yet, that a crew that cannot sit down together for 20 minutes is a crew already half-beaten. Their slowness was a decision made by people who had watched haste kill more friends than the enemy ever had, and they wore it the way a veteran wears a scar, without apology. Neth had been assigned to the slowest ship in the fleet as a punishment. He spent the first day counting all the ways its crew would get him killed. He would spend the last day counting all the ways they kept him alive. The Solankt hegemony had a saying that the Ophiri had borrowed and the humans had never adopted, and it was this: a warrior is his reflexes and nothing else. It was not poetry to them. It was law. A Solankt recruit was measured the way you measure a blade, by the speed of the edge, and the moment the edge dulled the blade was retired. Warden Tirak had enforced this his whole career. He had personally signed the cull orders for 900 officers whose reaction times had slipped past the line, walked them off their bridges, handed their ships to faster, younger hands. The young, he taught, were the true currency of war. You spent them because they were quick, and because they were quick they were also cheap, and because they were cheap there were always more. The old you put ashore. The old were a liability you could not afford to mount on a hull. What Tirak did not say in the lecture halls, what he said to no one, was that for the past month his own right hand had begun, in the dark, when he was tired, to shake. The first drill was a humiliation, and Okafor enjoyed it. The formation ran a reaction exercise, 10 ships, blind launch targets popping at random bearings, and the rule was simple: kill the target. The clock was the only judge. The swift verdict and the quick arbiter and the rest of the young cutters tore the exercise apart, quills high, scoring kills in fractions of a second, the targets dying almost before they finished spawning. The Lodestar came dead last, by a humiliating margin. On 3 targets the old gunners did not fire at all. In the after-action channel, an Ophiri flight officer read the scores aloud with the gentle cruelty of the young, and the Lodestar's number was so far down the list that he paused, as if unsure whether to even say it, the way you might hesitate to read out a corpse's name. Neth pulled the gunnery logs apart afterward, expecting to find slow reflexes, blindness, palsy, an old crew failing exactly as predicted. That was all there. But there was something underneath it that did not fit. The 3 targets the Lodestar had not shot, the 3 that had ruined her score, all 3 had a flutter in their spawn signature, a tiny repeating jitter the other ships had ignored. He flagged it. Then he flagged what the jitter meant. The 3 the old human ship had refused to shoot were the 3 the exercise system had logged as decoys. The fast ships had killed every target handed to them, including the fakes. The slow ship had been the only one in the fleet to tell the difference. Okafor, when the score came through, did not look up from her plot table. "We came last," her exec told her, a young liaison officer the fleet had stapled to her staff. "We came last by a country mile, Captain." "I know," she said. "I wasn't shooting at the clock. I was reading the room. The skirmish that came next was real, and it taught Neth the difference between a clock and a war. It was a border patrol gone wrong, a Solanked probing element, 4 light raiders that should not have been there, and the formation went to alert with the young cutters surging forward, eager, beautiful, lethal. The raiders opened the engagement with a maneuver, a sudden splitting break, half the formation peeling left and lighting their drives hot and bright, a target so obvious and so fast and so tempting that every reflex in the youth fleet screamed to fire. The swift verdict fired. So did the quick arbiter. So did 6 other ships, a wall of fire chasing the bright peeling half of the enemy formation, gorgeous, instant, and aimed at nothing. The bright half were drones. The real raiders were the dark half, the ones that hadn't lit their drives, sliding low and cold along the ecliptic toward the formation's exposed flank, while every fast gun in the fleet emptied itself at decoys. On the Lodestar's bridge, nobody fired. "Hold," Okafor said. "Just that. Hold." Said Marlowe's palsied hands lay light on the helm, and they shook, and the ship did not move because he had learned 40 years ago that the helm does not feel your hands shake, it only feels where you put it, and he had put it nowhere. Lottie Vance sat at her gun with her good eye half closed, not tracking the bright targets at all, her head tilted as if listening. She was counting. She had been counting since the break started. "There," she said, and laid her sight on the dark and empty stretch of sky where nothing showed, and waited, and the cold half of the raider formation slid into exactly that piece of sky on exactly the heading she had counted them onto, and she fired once, by timing, by memory, by 50 years of knowing where a thing that was hiding had to come out. The lead raider came apart. The others, suddenly seen, suddenly naked, broke and ran. Neth's crest had gone flat against his skull without his noticing. He sat in the silence of his own bridge and replayed it, the bright lie, the dark truth, the one old ship that had watched the lie go by like weather and waited for the truth. His weapons officer asked him for orders, and he did not answer for a long moment, because the question he was chewing on had no orders in it. The question was, how did a half-blind woman shoot down a ship she could not see, before it arrived, in a piece of empty sky? He opened a channel to the Lodestar. He did not know what he meant to say. What came out was nearly an accusation. "You did not react," he said. "The whole fleet reacted. You did nothing." Lottie Vance's voice came back, dry and amused, an old woman who had been asked this before. "Reacting's for people who got surprised," she said. "I wasn't surprised. Saw that same break at Hadril's Gap before your grandmother hatched. The fast ships died first." "They always do," Okafor said, and did not look up from her plot. "They die fast because they were taught that fast was the same as good." There was a lull after the skirmish, the kind of empty hour a fleet spends waiting for the next thing to come find it, and Neth could not let the question go. He shuttled across to the Lodestar. He told himself it was an inspection. It was not an inspection. He found Okafor in the observation gallery, alone, a mug of something dark steaming beside her, watching the stars the way only the old watch them, as if she had decided long ago which ones she would not live to reach and made her peace with the list. She did not turn when he came in. "Sub-Marshal," she said. "Come to count the wrinkles." His crest moved, embarrassed. "I came to ask why," he said. "Why a crew like this? Why you? The Alliance has young commanders. Faster hands. They put you ashore for a reason, and then they woke you up." "They put me ashore because my hand shakes," she said. She held it up. The tremor took it, drew its small circle in the air between them, and she watched it without shame, the way you watch a tide. 417, Reflex Standard. The day my reaction time slipped past the line, they walked me off my bridge. Younger hands, like you said. Quicker. She lowered the hand. I trained most of those quicker hands myself. Neth said nothing. He had learned by now that her silences carried the cargo. I buried a generation of them, she said. The young ones I trained and certified and sent out ahead of me, because the doctrine said fast goes first. They were the best I ever made. They were quick, and they were brave, and they were cheap. And the Navy spent them like coins, and I signed the orders that sent them. And I came home from every one of those funerals more sure of a thing I was not allowed to say out loud. She turned to him then. Her eyes were dry and very old. We don't spend the old because the old are worthless, Sub-Marshal. We spend the young because we've taught ourselves the old are worthless. And so we keep the slow ashore where it's safe and feed the quick into the fire. And we call it sound doctrine because the quick die we so beautifully fast that nobody has time to ask whether they had to die at all. Neth's quills had gone flat without his permission, the third time, and he let them stay flat. So you asked for the old, he said. The ones they threw away. I asked for a crew the Navy couldn't waste, she said. That was the whole of it. 41 names somebody had already decided were finished. There is a particular freedom in commanding people the institution has already written off. Nobody up the chain is saving us for anything. We are nobody's investment. She picked up the mug, and her shaking hand carried it to her mouth without spilling a drop, because she had had 6 years to learn the trick of it. The young have everything to lose, she said. We've already lost it. That makes us calm. That makes us patient. That makes us, in the 1 hour that matters, the only ones in the fleet not afraid. Neth carried that back across to his cutter and could not put it down. His people measured a warrior by the speed of his edge, and here was a woman whose edge was gone, who knew it was gone, who had built her entire ship out of warriors whose edges were gone, and who was somehow the most dangerous officer in the formation. He did not have a word for it in his own language. The closest his translator could find rendered it, uselessly, as a kind of weight. Then the Solanct came in force, and the saying about reflexes was put to the only test that ever mattered. This time it was no probe. Tyrek brought a fleet, and he brought it himself, 11 heavy elements and a screen of raiders, and he brought it through the gap at Cassin Drift, where the Alliance formation was thin, and he brought with it the doctrine he had spent his whole life perfecting, the maneuver the War College called the mirror feint. It was old. It was older than Tirak. It was, by the standards of the youth cult that revered it, almost embarrassingly old, a trick from the last great war. And that was precisely why he trusted it, because every crew in the galaxy had been trained against it, which meant every crew in the galaxy reacted to it, and a reaction you can predict is a leash. The mirror feint worked like this. You split your fleet into 2 mirror images, identical signatures, identical headings, one real and one ghost, and you made the ghost half a fraction faster, a fraction brighter, a fraction more threatening, so that a crew trained to engage the nearest fastest threat would orient on the ghost. And then, while they committed, while their guns and their bows and their whole formation rotated to face the lie, you brought the real half through the seam they'd opened by turning. The faster the crew, the harder they committed. The faster the crew, the deeper the seam. It was a trick built specifically, lovingly, to kill the quick. The youth fleets were the quickest crews the galaxy had ever fielded. They died the way the doctrine drew it on the board. The Solanct mirror split, and every fast cutter in the Alliance line saw the bright ghost half come screaming in, and did what its reflexes had been honed for since the Academy, oriented, committed, fired. The swift verdict rotated her whole hull to bring her main battery onto the ghosts. The quick arbiter did the same, and a dozen more behind them, a wall of beautiful fast ships all turning together to face a half of the enemy that wasn't there, opening the seam, and through the seam Tyrek's real heavies came at flank speed into a forest of exposed sterns. It was not a battle after that. It was a culling. The bright ships died bright. The quick arbiter took a full broadside through her open flank, and her reactor let go, and she became a small new star that lasted 4 seconds. Crews that could put a round downrange in 90 seconds found that 90 seconds was an eternity longer than they had. The comm channels filled with the sound the galaxy's fastest warriors made when speed turned out to be the wrong god. A high overlapping panic, contacts everywhere. Which ones are real? Fire at what? The mirror. It's the mirror, and underneath it T-Rex heavies methodically gutting them from inside their own turn. Neth watched the swift verdict, the sister ship he had trained on, the fastest cutter in the squadron, rotate gloriously to engage the ghost and present her bare back to the real enemy. He keyed his comm to scream a warning, and his own crew was already committing to the same turn, the same reflex, the same death, his own quills flat, and his own helmsman already rotating the bow toward the bright lie, because that was what they were, that was all they were, the fastest reflexes in the fleet, running straight off the cliff the doctrine had built for exactly them. And then a voice came on the open channel, unhurried, almost bored, an old woman who had somewhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. All ships, Okafor said. The bright half is the bait. I've seen this one. Stop turning. Stop turning and the trick doesn't work. Some of them stopped. The ones who stopped lived. The lodestar had not turned at all. While the fleet rotated, the old ship sat fat and slow and broadside on in the seam, exactly where Tyrex's real heavies were coming through. And she was not turning to chase ghosts because her captain had seen this trick fired in anger before half the dead out there were born. And the only crew alive in that whole formation that did not flinch was the crew the Navy had thrown away. The enemy had one trick left, and it was a very old one. Every crew in the fleet had been trained to react to it. Only one crew aboard one obsolete ship had been alive the last time it was used. Holding the line is not free. The galaxy likes to pretend it is. It is not. The lodestar had been built 11 years before her own crew retired, and she had been mothballed because her reactor was a generation behind and ran hot and ran rough and needed a hand on it, the way an old animal needs a hand on it. That hand belonged to Master Chief Dawit Bakile, and the fleet surgeons had drawn a red line through his heart and written, "Do not certify." And Okafor had read that line and recommissioned him anyway, because he had asked her to, and because she did not believe a man's last good work should be taken from him by an actuary. Now the lodestar was broadside, in the seam with T-Rex heavies coming through, and that meant the reactor was being asked for more than it had: sustained shields, full main battery, hard burns to hold position, and the old reactor began to slide out of tune the way it always did under load, the harmonic going rough, the rough note climbing toward the note that meant scram, meant dark ship, meant dead in the seam. Beckley felt it through his palm before the gauges showed it. He went down into the reactor gallery alone. There was a young liaison engineer who could have gone, and Bekele sent him to the bridge with a message and a clipboard and an errand that did not need running. Because Bekele had seen what was coming in the harmonic, and he did not want a boy to watch it. Then he put both hands flat on the housing, the way he had at startup, and he began by feel, by ear, by the kind of knowing that takes 40 years and cannot be installed, to walk the old reactor back from the edge one tremor at a time. It held. He held it. He stood in the heat with his hands on the housing, and he kept the rough note from climbing, manually, breath by breath, and on the bridge the lights stayed on, and the shields stayed up, and the guns stayed hot, and nobody up there knew that they were running on an old man's hands. His heart began to fail in the 11th minute. He knew what it was. He had been told what it would feel like. The surgeons had been very precise, and it felt exactly as they had promised, and he had a choice, and the choice took him no time at all. He could let go of the reactor and climb to the medbay and lie down and let a machine try to start his heart again, and the reactor would slide and scram, and the lodestar would go dark in the seam, with Tyrex heavies 40 seconds out. Or he could keep his hands where they were. He keyed the reactor channel. His voice, when it came up to the bridge, was steady. "Captain," he said, "reactor's good for the fight. Don't pull anybody down here. I've got her." Okafor heard the thing under the words. She had heard it before too many times, in too many young voices. "Dawit," she said. "I've got her, Captain," he said again, and the way he said it closed the door, gently, the way you close a door on someone you are sparing. "Finish it. I'll keep the lights on." He kept the lights on. He kept them on through the whole of the seam fight, both hands flat on the housing, holding the rough note down by the strength that was leaving him. And the lodestar's shields never flickered, and her guns never went cold. And when it was over, and the bridge called down to the reactor gallery to say, "Well done." "Well done, Chief," there was no answer. They found him where he had stood, both hands still flat on the housing. The reactor was running clean. The young liaison engineer was the one who found him. The boy Bikil had sent up the ladder with the clipboard and the errand that did not need running. He understood, standing there, why he had been sent away, and he understood that the old man had spent the last clear thought of his life making sure a stranger's son would not have to watch. And the boy who had come aboard the lodestar 3 weeks ago, certain he had drawn the worst posting in the fleet, sat down on the deck of the reactor gallery and put his head in his hands and learned, all at once, what the Grey Fleet had been trying to teach him with their slow meals and their wandering letters. He was the youngest hand aboard. He would not be the same young man when he climbed back up that ladder. Okafor came down to the gallery herself. She did not let anyone else come. She stood in the heat for a while, an old woman with a shaking hand, looking at an old man who had stopped shaking, and she did not weep, because she had learned a long time ago that weeping is a thing you do later, alone, and right now there was a battle, and he had bought it for her, and the only thing she could do to honor the price was spend it well. She put her trembling hand flat on the housing where his had been. The metal was warm. She left it there a moment. He didn't want the safe hour, she said, to no one, to him. None of us came back for the safe hour. Then she went back up to the bridge and finished the war he had paid for. Tyrak, when the bright fleet was broken, turned his heavies on the one ship still left in formation, and his orders carried a contempt that the broadcast caught and sent to 100 watching worlds. "Finish the slow one," he said. "The geriatric hulk. It hasn't even turned to face us. It can't. Take it." It had not turned to face him because it did not need to. That was the thing his doctrine could not hold in its head. The mirror feint worked on crews that reacted. The lodestar did not react. She had sat broadside in the seam from the first instant, guns already bearing on the exact volume of space the real heavies had to transit, because Okafor had read the geometry of the trick before it sprang and put her ship where the truth would be, not where the lie was. When Tyrex heavies came through the seam at flank speed, they came through the kill box of a ship that had been aiming at that spot for 90 seconds. "Fire as they bear," Okafor said. Lottie Vance could not see them. Her good eye showed her smears of light, and her bad eye showed her nothing at all, and it did not matter in the slightest, because she was not shooting at what she could see. She had the heading, she had the speed, she had the count, and she had 50 years of feeling in her hands the rhythm of a heavy ship under flank burn, and she shot the way she always shot, by timing, into the dark, where the thing had to be. Her first round took the lead heavy through the bow, at the join of its armor, the one weak seam, found in the dark by a blind woman who had memorized where that seam lived on a solanct, heavy before the ship she was firing from was built. 1. Then 2. The youth fleets had fired thousands of rounds and killed drones. Lottie Vance fired 11 and killed 4 heavies, slow, deliberate, each one placed, an old gun crew working a battery the way their grandparents had taught them. No waste, no panic, no clock, but the one in their own hands. And then, Tirak did the thing the doctrine demanded, the thing that worked on the quick. He sprang the second layer of the mirror, the inner feint, a split inside the split, designed to catch any crew that had survived the first by making them flinch at the last second, a sudden hard break by his flagship that any reflex in the galaxy would track and chase. Okafor watched his flagship break and did not move her guns a hair. "That's the same trick," she said, almost kindly, to her bridge. "Just smaller. He's done. He's just throwing the last card because he doesn't have another one. Hold what you've got. He'll come right back into it." He came right back into it. The inner feint was a curve, and the curve brought Tarek's flagship, after its lovely sharp break, back across the very volume the Lodestar's guns had never left. And Lottie Vance, who had not chased the break, who had simply waited, fired into the dark one more time and crippled the flagship of the Solankt hegemony through its open drive nacelle as it completed the maneuver that had killed 1,000 faster ships. On the open channel, on the broadcast, to Tirak and to Neth, and to the 100 worlds watching their fastest warriors die and their oldest ship stand, Ruth Okafor finally said the thing she had come a very long way and across a great many years to say. "You retire the ones whose hands begin to shake," she said. "We give them the helm. These are the ones you threw away." Warden Tirak heard it from the bridge of a crippled flagship, drifting, his fast young crew dead or screaming, and as he reached for the manual controls to try to save his ship by reflex, by speed, by the only god he had ever served, he found that his own right hand, in the dark, when he was tired, when it mattered most, had begun to shake. He looked at it. The whole doctrine of his life was in that hand, and so was the thing his whole life had been built to outrun, and they were the same hand. He had spent 900 officers off their bridges for less of a tremor than the one he watched run through his own fingers now. He understood in the drifting dark that the cull he had aimed outward for 40 years had only ever been a mirror, and the thing he had thrown away was the thing he was becoming. And he had taught the entire galaxy to throw away its only defense against the trick that had just killed his fleet. He did not fire again. There was nothing left to fire at except a slow ship that had already won, and a truth he could not shoot. The Solankt hegemony did not change overnight. Doctrines that old are walls, not opinions, and you do not talk a wall down in an afternoon. Tirak survived. He was referred to Fleet Command, quietly, by a faster, younger warden, and he found himself ashore at last, on the wrong side of the rule he had spent a career enforcing. An old man with a shaking hand, listening to the young explain why he was finished. But the Ophiri changed something. It was small, at first. Sub-Marshal Neth, who had been assigned to the slowest ship in the fleet as a punishment, and had watched it become the only ship that lived, went home and did not file the report his fleet mother expected. He filed a different one. He recommended, against every reflex of his people, that the Ophiri Navy stand up what he called a veteran cadre, the aged out and the slow-handed, not to fly the fast cutters, but to sit beside the young who did, and teach them which lies not to chase. They laughed at him. Then they read the casualty figures from Cassin Drift, the fast dead and the slow survivors, and they stopped laughing, and they let him have a dozen old officers to start. The first thing Neth did was request an instructor of his own, an old one, the oldest he could find. A retired flight mother whose hands shook, who had seen the mirror feint before, who looked at the young sub-marshal, asking to learn from her with a wary disbelief, because no one had asked an old Ophiri to teach anything in a very long time. It was Neth who said the thing, in the end. He said it to her, in the quiet of the cadre's first day, his crest lying low against his skull, held down now by something closer to shame than to surprise. It was the only time the moral of the whole bloody business was ever spoken aloud. "We spent our young because they were fast," he said, "and called the old worthless because they were slow. We never asked which of them came home." He sat with that. Then he said the rest of it, the part he had learned at Cassin Drift, watching a half-blind woman shoot a ship she couldn't see and an old man hold a reactor with a dying heart. "Speed wins the minute," Neth said. "Judgment wins the war. And judgment is the one weapon you can only forge by growing old." The Lodestar went home slow. She always would. That was who she was. She came into the Alliance yards 11 days after the battle, at a pace the young controllers found almost insulting. And the controllers, who had watched the broadcast, did not say a word about it, because you do not hurry the ship that did not hurry when hurrying would have killed everyone you know. They offered Okafor a flag, an admiralty, a desk and a star, and the right to retire the way the brass thought a hero ought to, ashore, lauded, finished. She read the offer the way she read everything, slowly, all the way through, and then she declined it. "I have a crew to keep flying," she said, "and a name to log." The name was Dawit Bekeles. She logged it herself, in her own crooked hand, the tremor drawing its little circle over the page, and she did not let the crooked letters embarrass her, because the man the name belonged to had died with steady hands on a reactor he kept lit past the point a steadier man would have let go. She wrote the date. She wrote the cause as it should be written. She wrote, in the remarks, 4 words the regulations did not require and could not have improved. He kept the lights. There is an empty chair in the reactor gallery of the CNS Lodestar. The crew leaves it empty on purpose. Bekeles' mug still sits on the rail above the housing, dented tin, the handle worn smooth by a hand that knew the ship better than the men who built her, and the rough note in the reactor still comes up under heavy load, and when it does, the old engineers put a hand flat on the housing the way he taught them and walk it back down, one tremor at a time. And somewhere behind the Lodestar, in the long, quiet parking orbits, where the Alliance keeps the ships it decided it was done with, the yard tugs had begun very recently to move. There were a great many old hulls out there. There were a great many old hands ashore. Captain Ruth Okafor, 74 years old, with a hand that shook and a judgment that did not, had filed a request, in her crooked, careful signature, to wake some more of them up. "My hands shake," she had written across the top of it, in the box where they wanted a reason. "My judgment doesn't. Pick which one you want at the helm."